Canada's an unfinished country, and this is one of the main bits of unfinished business that I see have taking place. And we live in such a unique opportunity that we can see in real time that narrative starting to shift. So we can't slow down now. Reconciliation is not over. It is certainly a work in progress.
Welcome to Sustainability Leaders. I'm Dan Adams, the head of the Office of Reconciliation here at BMO. Today's episode is part of a series on reconciliation. Throughout the series, we invite Indigenous leaders and partners to share perspectives on what reconciliation can look like and to explore how their insights and experiences can guide our collective journeys forward. This podcast series is aligned with our work to listen, learn, and act in ways to honor Indigenous voices, cultures, and rights.
Anin Bojo, Bindigan, hi, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Reconciliation series on the Sustainability Leaders podcast. Kayla Jacobs, Indigenous Cause, Oshkigamong Donjaba. My name is Kayla Jacobs. I'm a director with the Office of Reconciliation at BMO, and I'm excited to be your host. I'm recording today from Curve Lake First Nation on the traditional territory covered by Treaty 20 and the Williams Treaties, where I'm a member and I'm lucky enough to both live and work. I'm delighted to have our guest with us today, esteemed Indigenous leader Peter Dinsdale, CEO of YMCA Canada. Peter is also a member of Curve Lake First Nation and serves on several corporate boards, including the Oshkigamong Economic Development Corporation and the National Council for Reconciliation. Peter has an incredible wealth of experience, and I cannot wait to jump into our discussion. Peter's recording today from Toronto, which is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. The Toronto area is also covered mainly by Treaty 13, but also the Williams Treaties. I'll note that. Chimigwech for being here today, Peter.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Really excited for the conversation.
Amazing. Jumping right in, I'm going to hand it over to you and ask if you can share a bit about your career journey and, what it was that led you to reconciliation-related work.
Well, I never obviously ever intended to be in reconciliation work. I went to university for what was called then Native Studies and Political Science. And when doing my master's, had an opportunity to work at a friendship center, the Nisswakamuk Native Friendship Center, to work on education initiatives. And after that, worked in downtown Toronto, primarily with homeless Indigenous youth that were using a drop-in at Native Child and Family Services, and worked with the community members to develop an alternative school for kids in that community. It's still going on today. It's called the Native Learning Center in partnership with Jarvis Collegiate, something I was really proud of being able to do early on in my career. And then I went to work provincially doing education initiatives. And in addition to homeless initiatives, we created 250 shelter beds in friendship centers across Ontario. And then I was 29 and the executive director job at the National Association of Friendship Centers came up, and with all the ambition of youth, put my name forward, not really expecting, I don't think, to get offered the role at the time, and was offered the role. And my wife was 5 months pregnant with our first child at the time. So we picked up shop in Barrie where we lived and moved to Ottawa for that role. And it's the best thing that we've ever done. So I did that for about 7 years, and near the end of it, got to know National Chief Atleo, and we had a conversation, and I ended up moving over to AFN and eventually in the CEO role. And while at AFN, I was able to serve on the Truth and Reconciliation All-Party Committee. Of course, the commission is a part of a settlement agreement from survivors, and this committee was a part of it to do the national hearings and issue the report and all the things that came from it. So I was really honored to attend many of the national gatherings and sit with the commissioners through the crafting of the final reports and attend the launch at the end, and certainly was a highlight in my career. So as I moved on from AFN to YMCA Canada, you don't leave these portions of your role that is of you. So an opportunity as well at YMCA Canada through our role, and we might touch on that later, to deal with reconciliation in that context. And recently had the opportunity to join the board of the National Council for Reconciliation, which is one of the recommendations of the TRC calls to action, really to monitor and hold up a mirror to Canada and how they're doing. So it's one of those careers you can't ever plan, but certainly honored to have the opportunity to go through all those roles.
Amazing. Thank you so much. What a wealth of experience. I particularly appreciate you highlighting kind of the genesis of your experience and the nexus to reconciliation as more of a necessity. I think that really resonates and sets a great foundation for like what we're about to discuss today and provides good context for listeners. So thank you. My next question is about your work with the YMCA. So the YMCA vision speaks to vibrant communities where everyone belongs and thrives. I'm really interested in what ongoing reconciliation looks like in practice against that vision. Can you share an example or two?
It was interesting when I was leaving the AFN in 2016. At the time, there was a tragic suicide pact that some young women from Attawapskat First Nation were planning to kill themselves on a certain day. And thankfully, it was prevented. And they sent some elders and counselors to the community to ask what they want. And on top of one of the spreadsheets, they said they wanted a YMCA. And it struck me, leaving the AFN, moving to YMCA, what that might mean and the opportunity that might preside over. And I think I underestimated the extent to which general society is nervous about this notion of reconciliation, nervous about how to deal with this resurgence that's happening in Indigenous communities, not wanting to make a mistake and almost being paralyzed as a result and not moving on areas that they should. So I obviously felt comfortable navigating that landscape, know the chief, the regional chiefs, etc. Reached out. We sent a delegation up to Attawapskat to meet with the community, to look at their plans and the youth center, and we facilitated some knowledge sharing of things like policies and procedures and use of partnering through different charities to bring up supplies for the youth center that they're developing. Ultimately, Attawapskat got funding from the provincial government to develop a recreation facility, so we weren't needed there. But the Federation has been struck by this idea, and we are moving forward this idea of trying to build YMCA's on reserves. That would be the first thing I would say, is direct programming. There is one currently down east, a Member 2 First Nation. There's other plans in the place across the country, so excited about that opportunity. In 2018, we brought the entire YMCA Federation delegation at a AGM through a blanket exercise so that mainstream CEOs could understand and feel in their hearts what it is like to have land stolen and go through that history that so many of our people have gone through. And we're able to pass at that same AGM a national statement on reconciliation that talked about our intention to be good partners and our intention to work with communities when they want to work with us. And when they don't want to work with us, naturally, that is fine too. So that work has been going for a while. I think the biggest challenge remains the importance of paying attention to protocol in communities about respect of their territories that they're in, being respectful in our camps and all the programs that we have, reaching out to urban and rural communities about how we can partner and do better. We recently held a summit in Canmore at Camp Chief Joe Hector, just outside of Canmore this spring, which is great to bring program examples from across Canada. But we know we have a lot more to do. But I'm really excited about the journey that the YMCAs are on right now.
Thank you. I think it's so important what you just said, ending on we have a lot more to do. And I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier, that you underestimated how nervous like the general population are. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do you approach that? I think that's like a super common sentiment across the board. And it's just really interesting.
Well, a couple things. The first is I make it pretty clear that in the YMCA context, maybe that YMCAs are not responsible for 500 years of colonization, but we benefit from its current standing today. We all inherit that legacy. And they're also really nervous, a lot of these leaders, because they're a certain age where not a lot has been taught in schools. Has been something that is completely foreign to them, and they're nervous about their lack of understanding. So we spent a lot of time in our system on basic education of history, of cultural protocols. There are different peoples and how to approach them. I've directly helped CEOs meet with local First Nation, Métis, Inuit leaders to help navigate the pathways. It's not all that complicated for us that are in that world, but if you're from the outside, it almost feels like they're nervous about breaching any protocol. So I think it's patience. I think it's understanding. I think it's being a safe person and saying to them, they don't want to ask questions because they don't want to offend or be canceled. So I'll say, I understand you're coming at this from a good way, in a good place. So tell me what you're trying to understand. And even if you say it awkwardly, we can work through it together. And I think that's been helpful more than once. So yeah, that's how we've approached it. And I think it's gone well for the most part.
I think that's amazing. Thank you for sharing. What I'm hearing is this reminder that reconciliation is an ongoing practice, built through consistent actions and relationships built over time. So thank you for driving that home. That's fantastic. My next question. So many YMCAs are rooted in urban spaces, and we know that many Indigenous people live in cities. often away from their home communities. From your perspective, what role can organizations like the YMCA play in supporting connection for Indigenous people?
Yeah, I think a couple of things here. I think number one, to be clear that we're partners and allies. I've worked at Friendship Center, so not surprisingly, I have a ton of respect for the work they do and other urban institutions all across the country do. And I think we need to support them more. So I think those partnerships are really, really important for me, that we're not trying to be that place to replace that for them. That being said, we do have lots of programs and reach and opportunities to reach and be supportive. I think of a couple practical examples, one in British Columbia, where there is a youth mental health program called YMind, where it is around different resources to support youth in that space. That YMCA on their own went and created, in partnership with health authorities in BC, Mind Medicine, which is an Indigenous adaptation. It's not simply putting a different logo on it, it's an entirely different approach, and they went at it from a really respectful process. So in a community, an urban community where we'll have a group of youth, there's also opportunities to work in First Nation communities or in urban communities with First Nation populations, Métis or Inuit populations, around the importance of something like mental health. Another example is in Calgary, where they've been leading for some time in working in the public school system. I understand primarily around the grade 8 range before they go to high school. They learn about the drum in that year, regalia making, and at the end they're able to put on a powwow. And I think about the challenges for all of our people, anyone at that age group going, and your sense of identity and the pride that can come in knowing something like how to make your own regalia and how to participate properly in those events has been incredible. So they hire Indigenous staff, obviously, to do it, and they do it in partnership with the school board. But it is an incredible program and an example of reaching people where they're at and providing cultural safety and approaches moving forward. So we have examples of, in Ontario, through Hamilton, working with Six Nations in a Beyond the Bell program, where we have working on the on-reserve schools, sending staff to help post day at the end of a school day to work with students on their homework and other elements while their parents perhaps are working or doing something else, but an opportunity to be on the bell to get more access to programming. So these are the kinds of things that we're seeing approach, and we could talk about camps and other elements, but in urban areas, I think it's about meeting people where they're at, making sure that we're not trying to replace the growing, evolving Indigenous architecture that exists in urban areas, but how can we support them and really just make it better for everyone?
I love that in answering that, you touched on both urban and rural circumstances. It's exciting to see as it evolves, and fostering that belonging and tying everything back to the YMCA's vision, I think is just incredible. So thank you for sharing that. In my next question, I'll pivot to your work on the National Council for Reconciliation, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about. You gave a little bit of context, and for the benefit of our listeners, I'll give a little bit more. So I'll note that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's 2015 final report examined the legacies of Canada's residential school system and set out 94 calls to action to advance reconciliation. One of those calls was the creation of a National Council of Reconciliation, Action 53. It's an independent body intended to monitor and report on Canada's progress on reconciliation. I love that you said it's a mirror for Canada to hold up. I think that is such a great visual. The legislation establishing the National Council for Reconciliation came into force in 2024. And the inaugural board members were announced in 2025. You serve on the inaugural board. What has it been like to build something like this from the ground up? What feels important to get right in these early stages, and what's happening in that work now? I know that's a lot, but it feels like it's merited with this type of work.
Yeah, first off, it's such an honor to be doing this work, and it kind of feels like, in a way, the bundle's handed to us to help continue on the work of the commissioners, and so many others are doing it. Again, it's not just this work, but our work is to how to maintain the energy and monitoring what has happened on the TRC calls to action, what needs to take place, and I view how can we energize areas that may or may not be moving forward. The first year has been a lot of organizational development stuff, so maybe not, the most fun elements of it, creating committees and board members and hiring our first staff and getting investment accounts and all those things that you have to do to get a properly functioning organization. Truly, we're still in the middle of it. We haven't even hired our CEO yet. We have some interim staff and some consultants, so it has been a slow drive. Now, we have had a couple of sessions, though, with researchers and others to talk about what is the current state of reconciliation, because we, as the National Council for Reconciliation, have a requirement each June 30th to table a report on the status of reconciliation and the achievement of the calls to action to Parliament. So we have finished this year's report, again, heavily influenced by some sessions that we've held to get some baselining of what has been taking place. There's a requirement that the minister, the prime minister, table this in Parliament. So we'll be watching for that in the fall. Obviously, it will be a public document that people can reflect upon on themselves. So that's what we've been up to. I would say our vision, we have to complete our organizational development, which will take the time it needs because we want to make sure that we're doing it right, is not just to talk about the good things, not just to talk about the bad things, but to really reflect upon what is happening in Canada. We've seen different sectors, whether it's child welfare or education, do different reports on the completion of various calls to action, or academic institutions doing their own analysis. But we've seen some areas of activity by some sectors. It's a little bit uncoordinated and it seems a little bit piecemeal. I'm really hoping that we gravitate and use the energy of all of them to drive forward in the same direction, that we give a fair and impartial place for people's efforts to be highlighted. So we show Canadians what's happening and inspire others to do some work. If there's a particular call to action which has laggard or not moved forward, perhaps we can use our convening power to call folks together to talk about what would it take to move this call to action, or what barriers are in the way and can we remove them, and how might we think about them differently. So I think there's opportunities for us to take an active place in. Even things like residential school denialism is an important opportunity for something like the National Council for Reconciliation to talk about the country that we're in and people's perspectives and how we see things, and how do we as a society talk to each other based on science and fact and come to some common understandings. Hopefully, again, that's a part of holding the mirror up to Canada. That is a part of our current narrative. There's some things that are going well, and there's some things that, we certainly need to do better. So it's an incredible honor to be on the inaugural board. It's, again, a lot more of an organizational development in the early days. And I think the fun stuff is yet to come. Able to dig in and be strategic about the areas that we want to shine a light on, good stories that we want to tell, but also areas that we're lagging. And I think that that will be some important work.
Absolutely. Excited to see everything as it comes out and unfolds. I think in your answer, I feel the theme that you noted, right? Like thinking about how to energize different areas. That's exciting. And what a task to compile a document to reflect the status of reconciliation in Canada.
I'm sure it won't be satisfactory to all. I'm sure people will wish we were harder in some areas, softer in other areas. I doubt softer. Mostly harder on other areas, but I think that is the challenge of this work, is to do it in a way that is keeping everyone in the conversation, but being honest and reflecting what's actually happening out there. So it's a challenge, but I think the group we have is pretty special and we're up for it.
It's crucial work. And one of my follow-ups to that is how you believe organizations, including those in the financial sector, may begin to see or feel the impact of this work over time. And I suspect maybe the answer to that will be a wait and see, as you noted, like things are kind of just getting going, but I'll pose it in any event.
Look, we live in such interesting times. I left AFN about 10 years ago, and I remember in those days, our engagement in the financial or just the economy sector would be areas of the duty to consult, hide taku, court decisions. We were just coming to grips with this implementation and what does that look like, a new framework, or maybe the free, prior, and informed consent under UN DRIP and the provincial legislation and how that would navigate into our work. So I've been gone from AFN for about 10 years and coming back on the Communities Economic Development Corporation, the Muskegon Economic Development Corporation. It shocks me to the extent to which the conversation has evolved in that time. The number of interesting opportunities that require significant engagement and partnership with the financial sector for us to see through. Opportunities that the Williams Treaties nations, of which we're a member, saw with the development of the small modular nuclear reactors. Other opportunities with Hydro One, you're hearing about them doing 50% partnership in transmission lines. The ability for our communities to develop their own vision for economic development, which I think is just as important as responding to other opportunities. What we want to push out, how do we live as Anishinaabe in this society, in this time, with our own resources and our own worldview, and how we want to move forward. So what is the financial sector's opportunity and responsibility at that time? What are the kinds of tools that support communities like ours and others to make decisions? What kind of additional support and resources can be put in place to make sure we're enabled and have the tools and mechanisms to take advantage of these opportunities? I think is a really, really important question. Everyone's evaluating governance and social risk and other relationships, but we need companies that are going to stand up. I don't think they need to manage reconciliation. I think they need to help us create a credible national picture of our institutions, and how we're able to move forward. I think ultimately, very quickly, the narrative is going to change from economic reconciliation, because if you really think about it, we're reconciling for centuries of colonization and trying to reinstitute nation and nationhood in our trading and our economies and what we want to do. I think in some ways, the more interesting work is nation building. I'm less interested in economic reconciliation. I'm more interested in our nation building and our institutions and our businesses as a strong component and enabling factor in that nation building.
It's really interesting that you've highlighted like the significant difference and the evolution that you see and where it could go. And I think it's interesting for us as well because we've seen significant growth in the Indigenous economy, right? And there's this increase across industries and building stronger relationships across the board as reconciliation efforts kind of continue to evolve. You've answered it. Why is it important for the financial sector to be engaged? I wonder if you have any further thoughts on what responsibilities would come with that role.
Too often, look, financial institutions get to decide what projects proceed and what don't because of the ability to control financing and opportunities to implement those, how we build assets and who shares that economic opportunity. I think that is an important thing that the sector plays into. If we think one step down from the nation, our individual businesses and communities are often faced with so many barriers to things like access to capital and quality of opportunities are challenged frequently with different colonial structures, financial structures that we bump into. So rather than just applying conventional models to Indigenous communities, I think we got to find different forms of engagement and different forms of opportunity, which could include, and we're seeing it, the sector broadly, access to capital. Doesn't name it specifically as such an important element. Perhaps risk profiles look different when you consider opportunities when working with Indigenous communities because of some of those other components. Have clear Indigenous procurement strategies and opportunities. I think we're seeing through other sectors that providing tremendous opportunity for Indigenous people and businesses to participate. Never mind the typical impact benefit agreement of things like employment and other investment partnership opportunities, which I also think are important, but I think are more the legacy pieces potentially that we've seen and work through. I think as our businesses and our nations get more sophisticated and grow and evolve in this space, things like pension investments and other capital tools are going to be really, really important. They'll go above and beyond existing financial tools. But again, this becomes a part of the nation building conversations that we need to have. It's not just reconciling. It's like, what are we building that is different? And frankly, having an Indigenous worldview in this space may mean we'll do it differently. If there is a mine that has a certain drawdown period over a certain period of time, there is always an imperative to get it down as quick as possible because investors and others want to maximize their return. Perhaps an Indigenous community wants to do it differently, if at all, because they want to do it to be easier on the earth and maybe it takes longer, it's more expensive, but that is a valid approach to take. Maybe thinking about long-term relationships differently is a valid approach to take. So I think these are opportunities when thinking about commercial interests and the tension that might come with working with Indigenous communities and nation building or reconciliation commitments can come into conflict. So I think that's an opportunity for financial institutions to really treat Indigenous peoples as governments and right holders in these conversations.
Really well said. My final question before we wrap up, if listeners take away just one insight today about reconciliation from your experience, what would you hope it is?
It's a work in progress. It's not a finish line. I think I've been nervous at some time that we've reached this concept of peak reconciliation, and we've seen activities and actions in provinces and support in communities across the country. The TRC calls to action has mobilized people's imagination and education of what has taken place and imagination about what we can do moving forward. So how do we keep the momentum going? The work is not done. There will be a fatigue and natural kind of drawdown of energy on this. I think it's our responsibility to pick up our opportunities where we have them and translate them into tangible opportunities for our people. And that means everyone still needs to learn the history, but that alone does not address what took place. We're going to make sure that Indigenous communities have the opportunities, that institutions can think about how can they influence and be a partner in reconciliation. And those areas that we talked about in governance and employment and procurement and other areas, that there's opportunities to contribute to that reconciliation. Canada is an unfinished country, and this is one of the main bits of unfinished business that I see have taken place. And we live in such a unique opportunity that we can see in real time that narrative starting to shift. So we can't slow down now. Reconciliation is not over. It is certainly a work in progress.
Beautifully said. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a true pleasure, genuinely, to learn about the work that you're advancing, and I can't wait to keep following it.
Yeah, Miigwech, thank you so much. I appreciate it, and great podcast.
Thanks for listening to Sustainability Leaders. This podcast is presented by BMO. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. Press the follow button if you want to get notified when new episodes are published. We value your input, so please leave a rating, review, and any feedback that you might have, or visit us at bmo.com/sustainability leaders. Our show and resources are produced with support from BMO's marketing team and Puddle Creative.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of Bank of Montreal, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.